This gesture of bowing, um, I find very beautiful. It feels very natural and spontaneous as a kind of recognition of that, of the sacredness of all beings. So, good day to everyone. I'm looking at each of your little little squares, your faces. So today I wanted to continue with our our conversation and exploration of intimacy, being intimate. And as this meditation was pointing towards, in order to be truly intimate really with others and with life, requires that we come home to ourself, that we be intimate with ourself, with our own direct experience. This is not about philosophy. I mean, there is a view here, there's a framework, but we hold it lightly. What's important is our direct experience and understanding. Frameworks are only helpful in that regard. They help orient the mind so the mind can let go. So, what does it mean to be intimate with experience? That's what I'll explore a little bit with you today in this talk, and then we can open it up to a conversation, dialogue. So, if we reflect a little bit on what our experience is, we can see that um, there are three components to it, actually four. But in terms of the experience itself, whatever experience we have is going to involve, in varying degrees, thought, feeling, and sensation. The experience we're having right now, this conversation, right? There's, in terms of sensation, there's sound, there's sight, there's touch, in terms of your own environment. There may be some smells and tastes also from a recent meal. There may be some feelings, which are a kind of sensation. Feelings, we can have sensations in the body, and then there are emotions or feelings. I'm using them interchangeably, although I know some people don't. But just kind of core feelings that all human beings have: mad, sad, glad, all their variations. There are more. So we have a particular mood or feeling right now. Maybe it's peaceful or calm or agitated or upset, angry, grateful, curious, open. And thoughts, right? Which we usually come as vocalizations, subvocalizations. We mostly hear our thoughts, but we also have images. So thoughts, feelings, and sensations. some combination of those. And then there is awareness, this kind of fourth element, which is not exactly an experience because we can't define it, but we know that it's here. We can say, I'm aware of thoughts, I'm aware of feelings, I'm aware of sensations. So, in being intimate with experience, there are kind of two main um, approaches, I would say. Stepping back from experience, where we accent awareness from objects in awareness. So there's a disidentification from thought. We witness thoughts and feelings and sensations. So there's a feeling of getting more space from our experience. We're differentiating awareness from its contents, context from content. And because we fuse and identify so normally with our thinking, feeling, and sensation, it's actually quite helpful to step back, have some sense of space, accent awareness. So that's the stepping back. Then there's a stepping toward, a stepping through the experience. And that's what I'm going to be emphasizing. And as you can tell, this is sort of important part of my approach in terms of teaching and my own inner discovery process is to certainly be able to step back and know ourselves as awareness, but also to step through our experience, to step forward and into. And these are complementary approaches. Some non-dual traditions emphasize one more than the other, and a very strict Advaita will emphasize the witnessing aspect and talk about thoughts, feelings, and sensations as appearances in consciousness, like watching a movie on a screen. And so the emphasis is really on freedom from thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And then there are other traditions that are more non-dual traditions that are more tantric. There's a tradition that comes out of Kashmir, tradition of Kashmiri Shaivism or Shiva Shakti tradition. And this is one that's actually most resonant for me because it's really about embracing experience and discovering the true nature of the experience itself. What is the true nature of thought? What is the true nature of feeling and of sensation? And I think it appeals to me for several reasons. One is there's a tendency in the stepping back, stepping away, to become dissociated, detached. And actually there's a danger of becoming identified as a separate witness, an observer, separate from the observed. And while this can allow a certain degree of freedom, it also can bring a dryness and sense of distance from our life. And maybe some of you have experienced it who've been meditators for some years. It's very common, actually, among contemplative practitioners, whether Buddhist or Hindu or Christian, Sufi, Jewish, where there is that kind of distancing from experience. So I wanted to accent today, in a way, it's a kind of review of a couple of forms of meditative inquiry that I found particularly helpful that are more tantric, that are more about stepping into and through our experience, our thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And yet, it's important to have a sense of spacious awareness as well. So, interestingly, as we have a more spacious awareness, we can actually enter into experience without getting lost in it. And as we enter into and go through experience, we feel more space as well. So it's very interesting. This is why they're very complementary, and attention weaves back and forth between awareness and contents of awareness, which are ultimately not separate. I don't know if any of you saw a very simple animated film called Powers of 10. Has anyone seen that? You raise your hand if you did. I can see Kai is raising his hand. Yeah, this is like years ago, and Lindsay also. Yeah, years ago, and I was so struck by this animated short film. I don't recall how long it is, maybe 10 minutes or something, and you probably could find it on YouTube. I should see if it's there still. Maybe it came out 30 years ago. I don't remember. But in it, there's a picture of the planet Earth, or maybe you start with a person, and then there's a step back of about times powers of 10, and you're up in the atmosphere looking down at the Earth, and you begin to see the edges of the Earth, and another powers of 10, and the Earth is a small blue sphere, and then another power of 10 back, and it's a little, a little spark of light, and then it disappears. So you go back, but you do it in steps, back. So that's the stepping back. That's kind of getting space, getting context. So you feel this vast space. And then you come back to the human body and you start going in to it by powers of 10. So you go from the physical level down to the level of bones and tissues and cells and molecules and atoms. And then you get into the core of the atom and there's space again. It's very interesting. It's a wonderful visual representation. It's like space all the way through. So it's like this is very interesting in terms of our experience, in terms of our feelings and sensations, and our contractions and constrictions. It's like when we go into the deepest level of that, we find space or some form of awareness and its essential qualities. This has been a really important discovery, firsthand discovery for me, which is why when I work with you, I ask the question, what's in the very center or core of this? Right? What's in the very center or core of this? And the other question, the other meditative inquiry that I often pose to people is about their beliefs, right? And we touched on this in our second meeting. What's your deepest knowing about this? So these are my little skillful means, my little meditative inquiries that I wanted to share with you. I'm not claiming they're the best in the world, certainly not the only ones, but I find myself drawn to them repeatedly, and they're quite helpful to sit with on your own. So I want to say a little bit more about each of those. One is the intention that we bring to our investigation is critically important. In a way, it's the most important thing because we can, we've all been introduced to methods, haven't we? Skillful means. And they all have their value and they all have their limitations. But the most important thing is, what is our intention when we begin our investigation? It's a good question to sit with in ourselves. Am I wanting to make myself a better person? Become a better person? That's the self-improvement project. Do I want to feel better? These are very common, very normal. Do I want to feel better? Most of us do want to feel better, don't we? If we're in pain, we want to be out of pain. If we're in discomfort, we want to be more comfortable. But I think the most powerful motive is, do we want to know the truth? Beyond being comfortable and feeling better and being a better person, do we really want to know the truth? No matter what, no matter where it leads. That's a good meditative inquiry in itself, isn't it? Like, what is it that I really want? Do I really want the truth? Do I really want to know who I am and what this is? Because this this intention, excuse me, is really at the heart of meditative inquiry. If you really want to know the truth, you'll find it. So when we approach our experience with that intention, the quality of our attention is different. With that intention, our attention is curious, open, affectionate, willing to experience, willing to see, willing to be with whatever's here. Can you feel this? The quality of this? You know this in yourself. Not to get something out of it, but actually just to know, to be intimate with your experience. That kind of, I'm willing to experience anything. This approach to our experience is a deep welcoming of our life as it is. We're not trying to control, we're not trying to manipulate. And our experience responds to this quality of intention and attention in the same way that we respond to it as individuals when we feel it from someone else. Think about how it is when you're with someone, a friend perhaps, or a friendly family member who just wants to know, how are you? Who's asking in a really open and interested and caring way, how are you? And who wants to listen, really wants to listen, really cares about you and really wants to listen. It draws you forward, doesn't it? It invites you to express what's deepest. And our inner experience responds in the same way. Our feelings, our sensations, our belief systems, when they're met with this quality of affection and curiosity and openness, they respond. And then a kind of a flow happens, a dialogue, and an intimacy ensues. So this is really what's most important. The particular little methods, the questions are secondary. Does that make sense? It's not so much about the technique. It's not, the techniques, methods are secondary. So intimacy comes with that quality of welcoming, that quality of openness, that quality of willing to embrace whatever's here. And the interesting thing about difficult experience, that is to say, reactive feelings and somatic contractions, is when we stop trying to get rid of them, or when we're willing actually for them to be there as they are for as long as they need to be. they actually begin to unfold. And it's not unusual at all for what unfolds, for what reveals itself, to be completely different from what it initially seemed to be. And sometimes it's the opposite. So it's like there's each of these areas of contraction actually bear a gift. This is a very important principle. You'll discover it, you probably have for yourself, and certainly in some of our exchanges, it's come up. When I've invited you to be more intimate with your experience, surprising qualities emerge, essential qualities. If we explore open to our grief, for instance, very often we'll find joy. If we open to a feeling of rage and powerlessness, we find power. When we explore shame, we find innocence. When we explore a tight fist of contraction, we discover space, just like in that Powers of 10 film that I was mentioning before. In a way, everything is actually opposite of what we imagine it to be. We take ourselves as separate individuals and we discover our undivided nature. So all experience is a portal. And we don't need to be afraid of any. It is important, I want to add this little proviso, that if there has been significant trauma, it's important that we're resourced before we go in, that we have support and resources so we don't get overwhelmed. And that's where professional help can be useful, or a good friend or family member. And that's also where having a feeling of space can be useful before we enter into any knot of tension. I'm thinking, I'm a little amused right now. I'm remembering uh, a meeting I had with my main teacher, Jean Klein, many years ago, 30 years ago, an individual meeting. And he was trained as a medical doctor, and he was trying to communicate this principle to me, the importance of uh, accessing space before you go into a contraction. And he was saying, oh, if you have a pain in your knee, like feel the space first and then invade the pain with the space. It was very funny, cryptic. I finally understood what he was talking about some years later. So, the sense of space is always here, and as much as we can tap into it, it's a good resource before we do this exploration. So there are gifts here, and what we tend to avoid are actually some of our most direct approaches to our true nature. And it leads to a growing sense of self-trust and confidence and openness with one another. It's liberating for our human nature. Even as I don't think there's any ultimate freeing from conditioning. It's not like we're ever going to be uh, free. of what conditioning we've been exposed to. But it does attenuate, it lessens in frequency and intensity. And so this process is really very open ended too. We just continue to develop greater intimacy with our own experience. And as we do so, we feel it radiating out as well. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot that I've touched on. And I want to give time for our conversation today. So let's open it up.